super excited for this class. For those who, actually everyone in this class looks like have been here once or twice or more than that. And Champagne, as everyone knows because I keep on repeating about it, is one of my favorite regions in the world, alongside Germany's Mosel Valley and the Rhone Valley as well for Syrah, and definitely Burgundy. But Champagne definitely stands up as number one alongside with Riesling, just because it has lower alcohol levels for me, and I love higher acid wines. And Champagne, as a region, produces wines that have a lot of acid-driven wines. Acidity also is one of the top components of a wine being very ageable. And so aside from Champagnes being something that you can drink already, it is also something that you can age. Depending on the producer's line we're in, sometimes it's a non-vintage base line that they have, to prestige cuvées, all of which you will be drinking today in the lineup, that can be aged. So again, it runs the gamut of something that can be aged and something that can be drunk now. Before we delve into special club champagnes, which I'm sure all of you came here for, Champagne, I want to talk about the region as it stands now as a region and as a drink itself. 2020 has been a very difficult year for Champagne. Everyone knows that, the pandemic, the tariffs that are happening, and Champagne already has seen a gradual decline in sales throughout the years, but this year was the most significant one so far. January to May of this year has seen about 32% in decline compared to last year's sales. So that is a very big number. If you look at it in terms of numbers, in 2009, after the banking crash, the year after 2008, they sold 293 bottles of champagne. They're projecting this year, by the end of 2020, to be selling only 200 million bottles. So this is already a bad year in 2009 for them to be selling. 2020 is projected to be even worse. 2018, just for comparison's sake, they sold 343 million bottles. And so this steady decline definitely contributes to a lot of unrest, or at least a lot of discussions in Champagne right now. One of which, for this year, they haven't even decided when to pick the grapes for harvest. And Champagne, typically, they harvest their grapes by the end of September. You want it to be picked kind of later, just to make sure that the grapes are phenolically ripe. And this year they're looking at picking to start by the 3rd or 4th week of August. This is going to be the 6th year in the last 100 years that they started picking so early because of the ripeness of the grapes and global warming. This is also another issue that contributes to why they haven't declared a harvest date or a start harvest date. That's because of the problems between the growers, the smaller houses, the farmers, versus the larger houses. By smaller grower producers, these are the wines that you will be drinking today, versus the larger houses like LVMH umbrellas, wines of Moët Chandon, Veuve Clicquot, Ruinart, Taittinger, even Bollinger, all of the larger houses. And so what's happening right now is, with the smaller producers, historically for the past 10 years, they have set the maximum yields for picking grapes at 10,000 kilos per hectare. That translates to 653 euros per kilo. So that's about like 60,000 for 10,000 hectares. These grower producers normally have 3 hectares of land. So that is their entire year's income. Well, you have to remove your labor costs, production costs, all of these things. So they really aren't making that much. But the problem with that is that the maisons, the larger houses, don't want 10,000 maximum yields. They want 6,000 or 7,000 this year. This is going to be the lowest in recent years. Because for them, there is a glut of champagne production recently, wherein they are sitting on 1.2 billion bottles of champagne in their stocks. And they want the ideal number is 400 million. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers to you, but the global scale of how champagne sales have declined, was really doing research on this, have really put a spotlight on how bad this region is facing. It's not as bad as South Africa, where they placed a ban on alcohol sales altogether. At least France will never not live without any sort of champagne or wines. But across the world, definitely a decline in sales on this. And you can't just look at the pandemic and the tariffs that are happening just in the United States. Champagne needs to look internally as well, because the way that they are marketing this is, they keep on marketing this as a luxury product. And so when you continue on marketing something as a luxury product, a lot of people are very intimidated by this. Change of market trends, a lot more buyers are looking into purchasing wines that are ready to drink as opposed to aging it. And so when you're looking at something that is, hey, we'll just have something that's ready to drink, normally you're looking at bigger production wines, sometimes even natural wines, to be honest with you. And speaking of natural wines, a lot of new buyers are very much more on the ecologically conscious mind frame of this. Well, Champagne's not exactly the most ecologically friendly region in the world. And 25% of their vineyards right now are certified organic. It is very hard to certify a vineyard organic because when your vineyard is right next to a large house, which typically uses commercial pesticides, they spray it from above the air. And when that happens, it could. So let's start with the first champagne. I hope everyone enjoyed your champagne cocktails. Hopefully it tied you over with all of the blabbings that I've done. So, Special Club, the first wine, or the first set that you have is by A. Margaigne. It is not Arnaud Margaigne, it's actually Andre Margaigne, who is the great-grandfather of Arnaud Margaigne, the current winemaker. It's a typo on my end, I'm sorry. And then the Pierre Gimounet, that's the second wine. Both of these are 100% Chardonnay. Very different winemaking methods, though. So let's start off with Arnaud Margaigne, one of the smallest grower producers in the club. They only hold 6.5 hectares of land. This winery was started in 1920 and was admitted into the Special Club in 1977, so 6 years after the creation of the Special Club designation. This is also, they're located in Montagne-les-Reims, so if you look at the map in one of your sheets, Montagne-les-Reims is at the very north end of, that region is on the northern end of Champagne. They are coming from a Premier Cru site called Villiers-Marmery. So Villiers-Marmery is a Premier Cru site, and it's an anomaly. Essentially an anomaly just because when you're looking at Montagne-les-Reims, this is Pinot Noir land. But then once you go into this village, this Premier Cru village, they dominantly plant Chardonnay. So aside from it being a dominantly Chardonnay village, they also only cultivate this type of Chardonnay that is a special clone that can only be found in that village. So in the entirety of Champagne, there's about 319 villages. 17 of those are Grand Cru villages. So again, only select villages can produce that have been deemed like the top of the top. So the Arnaud Margaigne that you have is 100% Chardonnay with an average age of 40 years old on this. And a unique thing about Margaigne is that they age a part of their wines in oak, about 30% of it. Normally, if you're doing Chardonnay, you want that in stainless steel to highlight the purity of the fruit, to highlight that racy acidity to it. But he is one of those winemakers who decided to experiment in barrel use, and aside from the barrel use of it, he doesn't want malolactic fermentation. So malolactic fermentation, for just as a refresher, it's basically when they convert the malic acids, the tart acids, in wine and convert it into lactic acid, a more creamy mouthfeel on the palate. Oh, so before, with the food in front of you, I don't know if it's clear on which one is which, but let me just go around and just make sure. Yes. So basically, the peach is your indicator of it being the lobster sour, and then the one that has the foam is the king crab. Okay. I mean, go ahead and definitely try all of them, but leave some once we talk about the other ones. So, as I mentioned, they don't want any malolactic fermentation. So on one side, they use barrel aging for 30% of it, but on the other hand, they don't do malolactic fermentation at all. So it's a very interesting product, the end product of the champagne. Because normally, if you're doing barrel aging, you're also doing malolactic fermentation to make that rich flavor more apparent in the wine. So this is more citrus driven on it, a lot of that kind of refined, incisive, very vinous quality to it. So for me, great champagne, a true mark of a great champagne is that if you remove the bubbles, is it still a great wine? So yes, champagne is all about its bubbles, but in its core, in its essence, is completely a wine, a true wine or a still wine. When you're tasting a still wine for champagne, I've tried vine players from champagne that when you taste it, it's basically, it cuts all over your mouth. It's actually very painful, the way the acidity of it really goes all over. So this is more beeswax, preserved lemon on it, very refreshing. But if you compare this with wine number 2, the Gimone, here Gimone, very close to my heart. This is one of the first brewer producers that I've ever encountered, and basically fell in love with all 100% Chardonnay champagnes. So Gimone is one of the original winemakers, or one of the original members of the Special Club, and with the Special Club on that one, he was very instrumental in forming the rules of the club. It's also one of the larger members in the club, at 28 hectares. Normally it's about like 15 or less. So he has about 28 hectares of land, primarily in the Côte de Blanc. So the Côte de Blanc, if you're talking about Champagne, this is where you want to be. This is Chardonnay country. I forgot to mention a while ago why Champagne is also so expensive. Land in Champagne goes for about $1.4 to $2.4 million for a hectare of it. It's not the most expensive. In Burgundy, $3.4 million buys you a Premier Cru, a hectare of it. But the Côte de Blanc is the one that commands the highest price at $2.4 million a hectare. So very priced vineyards on this one, just because of how the chalky soils definitely contribute to the end product of the Champagne. So this is, they've been growing grapes and Champagne since 1750, and they only started estate bottling in 1935. So a lot of history behind this particular producer. He focuses mainly on Chouly and Cremant Grand Cru. So these are 80% of their Special Club is Grand Cru, and the rest is Cuy, which is the Premier Cru. They decided to add the Cuy in that particular bottling just because the Cuy actually has the most amount of that acidic lift. Cremant gives it a bit more texture, a bit more of that expressiveness and roundness of the palate. So if you're tasting both of them side by side right now, Margaigne does a little bit of oak aging, no mallow. Here, the Gimone, on the other hand, is full mallow, all stainless steel. So again, it should balance each other out in terms of like that style, but I find that the Gimone, once the Gimone ages a bit more, you get more of that plumpness and roundness and toastiness to it. The vintage that you have right now is the 2009. Please let me know if you need a refill on anything, because we're just keeping them cold for you. Just raise your hand, just let us know. Yes, sir. Which one would you like? All right.
Well, the Margaigne, is the oxidation there?
Which one?
The Margaigne, is there oxidation or no?
So it's because of the barrel on it one. So once you use barrel aging in your wine, you're letting a little bit of that oxygen go in there. And so when you have that, it gets a bit of more of that toastiness to it. Very similar to how Krug would have it. Gimone is more reductive in style. So when I say reductive, that's more flinty, that's more smoky. But if you give it more bottle aged, then that's when that toastiness really makes itself more apparent. So this one is the one that is there with the Maine lobster salad. That's the one with the peach on it. Some of it, yes?
Does land ever come available in Champagne, or is it always just kind of handed down?
that's the problem with it right now too, because France has the inheritance laws on it, wherein every heir has to have equal share of from their parents. And so what happens with that is that once they find out that, hey, my land is worth this much, they'll just sell it to the biggest buyer. And those bigger buyers are usually the conglomerates, all of the bigger companies. And so it's also the reason why rural producers, they average about 3 hectares only. Because once you have that 3 hectares and then you have 3 kids, great, you only have 1 hectare. So it's more economically viable for you to sell that vineyard site as opposed to farm it on your own. So vineyard does become available at the right moment. If you know that, hey, this guy is a grower and then that dies, great, there, you have land that's available. But for them, Champagne, members of winemakers in Champagne are very also more on the, we would rather sell it to people that we know kind of thing. Unless it's like a really big land that they don't really care about, it's not a premier cru or whatever, they'll go for that. All right, so another thing too is that with the Grand Cru sites of Pierre Gimonet, they also farm some of the oldest vineyards in the region. We're talking about vines coming from 1911 and 1913. So again, they don't skimp on the top wines of the estate at all, which always includes, it's a mandate for special club wines. So for the second set that you'll be having, there's going to be 3 champagnes on this. So I'll look for another established family in Champagne, because Champagne is not their only business. When I say well established, it means that they have a lot of connections throughout the region, because when phylloxera hit, this family, their first business is rooted literally in grafting and propagation of vines, of Champagne vines in the region. So they were very instrumental in replanting the vineyards of Champagne. And no, not necessarily. It's just they help like the grafting of it. Grafting of it, the propagation of it, basically the farming, the know-how of replanting an entire vineyard after phylloxera. And then at the same time too, just walk down the road, they own a hotel or like a guest house in Champagne. So a while ago when I was mentioning about the decline of Champagne, it's also the region that is experiencing less people or visitors, tourists, obviously with the pandemic. But they, just a couple of weeks ago, they released a campaign wherein if you visit Reims, they will give you a bottle of champagne per adult. And so, the only things that you need to fulfill is that you need to stay in a hotel or a guest house in Reims, eat out at least once in a local restaurant, and do one activity in the region. So essentially just visit a winery and then you got it. And then once you leave, you get a bottle of champagne. This cost them about like 50,000 euros just to inject tourism back into Reims. A lot of things that you can do in Reims. There's a lot of great restaurants over there as well. So you will not be wanting for stuff to do. So booking the next trip. I was reading something about revenge tourism for next year. Once the pandemic is over, a lot of travel bugs, one of them, I really miss traveling. It's more of like, I can't do anything this year, you know what, I am going to save up and have like a really extended vacation. I'm sure a lot of people are doing that. So again, just Champagne, keep in mind, it's really a great area to visit. So they have been estate Henri Couture. The vintage that you're having right now is from the 2006 vintage. So Henri Couture is one of those producers. Their current vintage is actually 2006. So they haven't released any other vintages. They release upon order. So they disgorge upon order. Because I don't remember the Henri Couture bottle 2006 looking like this. So this was disgorged last year, 2019. So again, when you're disgorging this means that they have been in their caves for over 10 years. It's a pretty crazy thing to hold back and choose to hold back your wines that way. So this particular wine is also one of the few champagne houses that is 100% 100% Grand Cru. So this is 100% Grand Cru coming from Ai. It's a village that is completely sun-drenched, and so the grapes are really on the riper side to it. It is a wine that tends to have if you like the older, kind of like oxidative, developed styles of champagne, Hollywood or might be more to your liking than the younger ones. All right, so it is often also characterized as a wine that is on the richer side to it. Richer, the oldest one. Honestly, it tastes like biscuits to me. Like kind of like almost like a what's that? What's the Delta cookie? Delta Airlines. Yeah, the Biscoff. It has kind of like that Biscoff quality to it, which is a really cool thing to have with aged wines. It's either you get like a brioche or a toasty tone to it. This one is all stainless steel, malolactic, and then 7 years minimum on the lease. Obviously, they go way beyond this on a lot of their different bottlings on it. So riper tree fruit on this. Marked toastiness. I find more of this to be more on the ground coffee pineapple tone in the wine as well. So tropical tree fruit, and then think of it just like make a pineapple cake or something. So that's that flavor profile. So this one has a lot of Pinot Noir in it. So if you want to take a look at how Pinot Noir champagnes age, this is a good example of it. And lastly, for the last wine is which one?
This one.
The Mousson. Yeah, the last one. Yes,
That's not my question. Some of them are pink,
yeah.
this one's white. So tell us about.
Oh, the color. Okay. So rosé champagnes, champagne and rosés are basically the only region in France that's allowed to actually blend red and white wines together. Yes, it is 100% Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is a red grape, but they don't do an extended maceration, extended fermentation or press with the skins. Yeah. So they juice it, they remove it, so the juice is still essentially the color of the wine. If you're producing rosé, they do have rosés. Mousson Le Rouge rosés are really lovely. Those ones are sometimes Sangé, wherein they produce a red wine and then they bleed off a portion of it to make a rosé. And then they combine it with blending. So sometimes it's 30% Sangé and then the rest is blending and they make a rosé out of it. So a lot of different techniques to it. Last week's class was all rosé. We discussed like the different ways to make rosés.
And what champagne let them sit, contact the skin. What is the structure of wine?
So definitely the tannins are, you get a little bit more structure on the palate because a lot of the antioxidants, a lot of the texture, or not texture, a lot of that kind of mouthfeel to it, the tannins again, it's that feeling that you have at the back of your tongue. So you get that a lot from the stems and the skins and the seeds. So when you do an extended maceration or fermentation out of it, you basically extract all of those compounds into the final product. So definitely, even if you are a blonde noir, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to be a rosé. So it's definitely more of the white juice out of it. Then you can also produce a rosé if your champagne house wants to produce it. So the Mousson Le Rouge, out of all of the wines that you have, this one are two things that the others don't do. 100% biodynamic organic, and then this one is the one that is brut nature or zero dosage. So it is the driest wine out of the lineup. And when I said a while ago that this is a biodynamic organic producer, there's a reason for it. Sorry. So there's a reason for that because Sébastien Leon, despite the fact that he's the 9th generation of the family to make wine or make champagne, he's considered part of the 3rd wave of champagne producers, which includes Cédric Musset, who is another member of the Club Trésor, Benoit Dehu, as well as Aurélien Sunet. All of these are young winemakers. None of them are over 35 years old. They care a lot about the environment. They want to ensure how the vineyards and the vines themselves are being tended more in the ecologically friendly way. And so this has definitely resonated with a lot of sommeliers, just because of how ecologically friendly it is. So this one is the Mise en Eau, the last one, the 100% human mark. So they are located in the Grand Cru site of Verzy. So Verzy is in the Montagne de Reims. Montagne de Reims, in that area. Verzenay is a Grand Cru that sees a lot more exposure. Not a lot in Verzy, even though it's also a Grand Cru site. I like to think of Verzy as a Grand Cru site that has fruit in the core and then enveloped by a lot of minerality to it, as opposed to the reverse with Verzenay, where you have minerality at its core and wrapped by fruit. So this one is stainless steel.